Hello, welcome, and how are you today as you join our Maisons-Laffitte sermon time for this 9th week of Trinity? Well, I've got to say, for us, for the next 2 weeks, here on the outskirts of Paris, Olympic fever and Olympic logistics and everything is well and truly here. Doesn't matter what we're doing, we don't turn off the TV and have it disappear. But that doesn't mean that Charlotte and I don't have time for a visit. So if you'd like to chat with me or Charlotte or both of us over the summer, please do get in touch. Whether it's over tea in the garden or on Zoom, let us know that you'd like a chat because we're here for you. We'd love to hear what's on your mind, and we're available all summer. So please let us know. Meanwhile, let's turn our thoughts to today's Bible passage. From the lectionary readings, we're going to focus on the 2nd Samuel reading, which is in chapter 11, the first 15 verses. If you've got time, why not settle down and read the whole of the chapter before listening any further? Well, since the Olympics are unavoidably filling our minds, I do find myself being influenced in even preparing today's sermon by the games. I was really struck that the games are such a reminder of all that humans can achieve. It is amazing, isn't it? Which then leads me to think about, well, what has it taken for each athlete to get to this point? I'm not trying to go on a guilt trip here. I really am trying to figure this out. And I think about, it's those years upon years of training and sacrifice. So it wasn't surprising when the president of Paris 2024 said on Friday evening, you remember him, Tony Estanguet, he said, "Quand on aime les jeux, on ne se laisse pas impressionner par quelques gouttes de pluie." Well, I think some people found a drenching to be something daunting, but I kind of thought for the athletes, nothing in all the perseverance that they had been required to put in. But I mean, let's be honest, you don't have to be an Olympic athlete to know something about needing perseverance in life, do we? We all develop those keep going muscles throughout life. It starts young. Pick up your toys, even if you're tired. And then it progresses to now finish your homework. Doesn't matter if you hate chemistry. And then we start doing some self-talk, right? Got to get up, go to work, make the dinner, clean, whatever. And then we kind of add a spiritual kind of need to persevere on top of that. Must love and forgive my neighbor, even though I'm furious with them. Must remember to talk to God again and again and again. Well, perseverance. We know something about that. And that doesn't even take into account all of those trials we have to get through. Well, King David was at the absolute top of his game in around 1000 BC, which is when this story happens. Let's remember, he had come from being an unknown shepherd boy whose own father barely remembered his existence. Now, but that was 25 years ago. And today, king of a new nation, crowned in both Judah and Israel, anointed by the prophet Samuel. He's built himself an amazing new palace. He's got a standing army, soldiers and friends ready to die for him, not to mention wives and children. And yet, chapter 11 starts like this. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. But David remained in Jerusalem. Hang on. What's going on here? Is he ill? There is no evidence for that. And scholars estimate he's about in his early 40s. So, old enough to be disillusioned, but still young enough to yearn for more. So maybe he's having a midlife crisis. David remained in Jerusalem. Now, just pure speculation, but I can't help but wonder, does he tell himself he deserves a rest? Or perhaps it's kind of lost the thrill. Maybe there's even an undercurrent of dissatisfaction which has gradually snuck up on David, an almost imperceptible diminishing of motivation, of zeal for God's work. But here's the thing. Having chosen to stay at home, I dare say he's now bored. Chapter 11, verse 2. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Oh, David, you've got everything anyone else in Israel might desire, including God's explicit blessing, and yet you're out indulging a roving eye, still seeking more. And let's be clear, he is seeking. God holds David entirely responsible for what happens next. Any interpretation which suggests otherwise is ignoring the structure of this Hebrew text. The chapter is bookended at the start by David not doing what a king ought to. But then at the end, there's that line, which we'll get to next week. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So we have a start and a finish, and then right in the middle of the chapter is the murder of Uriah the Hittite. Now, this is a classic Hebrew chiastic structure. Don't worry about that, but it leaves the reader in no doubt. David is the one who's responsible for how far he's fallen. He's essentially broken all of the 10 commandments, and, unless we feel personally unconcerned by this, we may or may not identify with his lustfulness. But if we're honest, we probably can find, a bit of covetousness of some sort lurking in our hearts. And although we may be appalled at the lengths to which he goes to have Uriah killed, if we're honest with ourselves, we're probably also capable of some pretty impressive secret maneuverings to bring someone else down through just maybe sly words or withholding some help at a key moment. And because David is a leader, it's even worse. His sin isn't just his own, but he requires that his palace staff be complicit. They are required to go to Bathsheba's house. They are required to bring her to him. And what are the chances that Bathsheba had any choice in the matter? Yeah, don't think so. There she was, trying to discreetly bathe at twilight or even as it's fully dark, as was prescribed by the law, to cleanse herself after her monthly cycle. And suddenly the king's men are pounding on the door? And then in verse 15, it's David's generals who are required to place Uriah at the front of the battle. They have to put this faithful man in a place where someone else will cut his life short. And what about Uriah himself, one of David's 37 mighty elite men of war? Well, he served at the pleasure of the king. This man of incredible integrity, so trustworthy that he didn't even read his own death notice. He too is just a soldier, subject to orders. Now, the obvious parallel for us is that when a Christian leader gives up on walking closely with God, the ensuing rot of their character creates a stench in the lives of everyone they live and work with, and everyone for whom they are an example. And at some level, we're all leaders and examples for one another, aren't we? When David gave up on what he ought to have been doing and thinking about, well, the gates were open to the worst. He became blind to all that God had blessed him with, and he only saw those gifts as a means to take more, to feel sorry for himself, forgetting that everything he had should have been used to bless, to bring justice, and certainly not to abuse. For me, this is one of the Bible's most powerful examples of why we must always persevere in vigilance. Not about each other, but no, vigilance about our own hearts. Every moment, it matters whether or not I'm willing to humble my heart before God and say, yes, Lord, I will accept your way. I will relinquish that thing that, gosh, I thought ought to be mine or I really wanted. And I say every moment because the slow drift which we often experience away from God, well, it happens in an accumulation of so many careless moments, doesn't it? When I thought it didn't matter, just this once, whether I adhered to my spiritual training schedule. Well, ironically, we're most often in the greatest danger of drifting, not in the midst of tough times, but like David, when the pressure starts to drop, because then we let our guard down. Now, I am keenly aware that it's midsummer, regardless of the weather. And so please hear me clearly. I am not saying don't take a holiday. In fact, please let me encourage you to go away if you're able to. My husband and I plan to at some point, and to truly leave the cares of everyday life in God's hands. But during this time, when all other responsibilities fade into the background just a bit, why not use some of that space to take a moment to reflect on your life, on the year gone by? Maybe consider whether there's an aspect of persevering in which God might be inviting you to come back. Some form of spiritual battle which, come the rentrée, is really yours to engage in again. Because, and this is the most important point, which is why I've saved it till last, we can always come back to God. There is always an invitation on our Father's lips to come try again. His mercies are new every morning. So even though David broke all those commandments, God did not take from him his anointing. He did not remove the promise that he'd made to him about having a son on the throne forever. This was still fulfilled in Jesus, and Jesus is the very one who offers us all forgiveness of every sin. Because thankfully, God's faithfulness to us doesn't depend on our faithfulness to him. It depends on his unchanging, loving self. It takes courage to try again, to persevere again and again. So whatever your Christian calling is, may the Lord draw you into his loving, ever-welcoming arms afresh this summer and strengthen you for the battles yet to come. God bless.